Nia arrived at the office building a few minutes before noon. She had taken extra care getting ready that morning. Her hair was neatly tied back, and she wore a clean, professional outfit. It was a warm, sunny day, and the sunlight reflected off the glass doors as she stepped inside. The building was quiet, with the sound of soft footsteps and quiet conversations echoing through the tall lobby. Nia walked up to the front desk and smiled at the receptionist. "Hi, my name is Nia Thomas," she said politely. "I'm here for a noon meeting with Mr. Gregg from the development team." The receptionist looked up from her screen and gave a quick nod. "Okay, let me check for you," she replied with a smile. After a short phone call, she turned back to Nia. "You can have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." Nia thanked her and walked over to the waiting area. It was nicely arranged, with soft chairs and a table holding magazines. She chose a seat by the window and placed her folder gently on her lap. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Nia checked her phone quietly. It was now 12:15. She stayed calm. She had been in situations like this before. Sometimes meetings ran late, and sometimes people were just slow to respond. She took a sip of the water offered by the receptionist and continued to wait. At 12:30, the receptionist looked over with an apologetic expression. "I'm so sorry," she said gently. "He hasn't come down yet. I called again." Nia nodded. "It's okay," she replied, though she was starting to feel disappointed. She wasn't just a visitor. She had been invited by someone from the board for a possible consulting role. This meeting was important. She had spent hours preparing, doing research, and working on her presentation. By 12:50, she had been waiting nearly an hour. She had already looked through all the magazines, and her water bottle was nearly empty. The receptionist seemed even more uncomfortable now. Nia stayed quiet. She didn't want to cause a scene or be seen as impatient. But deep inside, she wondered if she was being taken seriously. She was professional, experienced, and had worked with big companies before. Yet something felt off. Still, she waited. Her fingers tapped slowly against the folder in her lap. She glanced at the front desk again. The receptionist avoided eye contact this time. Nia gave a small sigh and leaned back in her chair. She had done her part, showed up on time, stayed respectful, and waited patiently. She told herself that no matter what happened next, she had nothing to be ashamed of. She looked toward the elevator, still hoping someone would come down soon. The meeting hadn't even started, but the silence already spoke volumes. Nia looked out the large window next to her. Outside, people walked by quickly, some talking on phones, others holding coffee. Life moved fast out there. Inside, though, time felt slow. It was now after 1 p.m. Nia had been waiting for over an hour. She shifted in her seat and glanced at the elevator again. Nothing. No one came. The receptionist stood up and walked over to her. She spoke softly, almost in a whisper. "I just called upstairs again. He said he's still in a meeting. He didn't give a time." Nia smiled politely. "Thank you for checking." Inside, she felt a mix of emotions, confusion, frustration, and a bit of sadness. She had planned everything carefully for this meeting. She had looked up the company's background, reviewed past projects, and even prepared a set of ideas she wanted to present. This was more than just a meeting. It was a real opportunity. But now it felt like she wasn't important enough to be seen on time. Nia thought back to how the email invitation had come from one of the board members. They had praised her past work and said the company was looking for fresh ideas. Nia had felt excited and ready. She didn't expect red carpet treatment, just basic respect. At 1:20, she checked her phone again. No missed calls, no messages. She kept her phone screen face down on her folder and took a deep breath. A few employees walked past the lobby, some chatting and laughing. One of them glanced her way, then kept walking. She wondered if they knew she had been sitting there for over an hour, waiting to meet someone who hadn't even sent a message. The receptionist returned to her desk and made another quiet call. Her face showed concern. Nia appreciated her effort. She could tell the young woman didn't have much control over the situation, but still tried to help. Finally, around 1:35, Nia stood up and stretched her legs a little. Her back was stiff from sitting too long. She paced near the window for a moment, then sat back down. Still, no one came. She thought about leaving, but something inside her told her to stay just a little longer. She didn't come all this way to walk out without knowing why she was ignored. Nia picked up her folder again and opened it, looking over her notes one more time. She reminded herself why she was here. She believed in her work. She believed in the value she could bring. She was ready, whether they were or not. On the top floor of the building, Greg leaned back in a large office chair. He scrolled through his phone, occasionally glancing at the clock. Across from him, two of his coworkers sat with coffee in hand, talking about weekend plans and sports scores. Greg wasn't in a hurry. Even though he knew someone had come to see him, he didn't think it was important. "Someone's waiting downstairs," he said casually. "Probably just a walk-in looking for work." His coworker laughed. "You get those sometimes. They just show up out of nowhere." Greg nodded and shrugged. "Reception said she's been sitting there for a while. I told them to give her water and tell her we're busy." They kept chatting, not giving the situation another thought. Greg didn't check the meeting schedule. He didn't ask for a name. He didn't read the email from the board that mentioned Naya's visit. To him, this was just another person showing up uninvited. He assumed she wasn't important. He didn't take time to ask questions. In his mind, important people didn't wait. They called ahead. They came with introductions. They didn't sit quietly for over an hour in the lobby. He didn't know who Nia really was, and he had no idea how wrong he was. Back downstairs, Nia remained calm. She checked her notes again and tried to stay focused. The receptionist gave her an encouraging smile from across the room. She looked embarrassed by how long Nia had been waiting. But upstairs, Greg wasn't thinking about any of that. He was too busy telling a story about a golf game. His coworkers laughed loudly. "You know," Greg said, "we got a lot of people asking to work with us these days. I can't just meet everyone who walks through the door." His words came from a place of pride, but also from assumption. He believed he could tell who was worth his time just by hearing a name or seeing a face. And because of that, he was about to make a big mistake. In a few minutes, everything would change. The elevator doors would open. People would step out who knew exactly why Nia was there. They would ask Greg why he had met her. And then Greg would learn something important, not just about Nia, but about respect, timing, and the danger of judging someone too quickly. Nia looked at the clock again. It was now almost 2:00 p.m. 2 full hours had passed since she arrived. She was still calm on the outside, but inside, she was wondering what kind of company would treat a guest this way, especially someone they had invited. Just then, the receptionist picked up the phone again. She spoke softly, then looked over at Nia. "He's coming down now," she said with a small, hopeful smile. Nia gave a nod and stood up. She straightened her papers, picked up her folder, and waited quietly near the desk. After a minute or two, the elevator dinged and the doors opened. Out walked a man in a dark suit, holding his phone in one hand and wearing a half-interested look on his face. "Are you Nia?" he asked, glancing at her quickly. "Yes," Nia replied. He looked surprised. "Okay, well, we're kind of busy today," he said, not making eye contact. "Maybe you can leave your resume or send us an email next time." Nia paused for a moment. She kept her voice steady. "I was invited here for a meeting by someone on your board." Greg looked confused. "You were?" Nia nodded. "Yes, I was asked to present a proposal for your company's next development project." Before Greg could answer, the elevator dinged again. This time, 3 people stepped out, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in business clothing and moving with purpose. They looked around, spotted Nia, and walked over quickly. "Nia, there you are," the woman said warmly. She was Clara Jeffries, one of the company's senior board members. She smiled and gave Nia a friendly handshake. "We've been looking forward to your presentation." Greg's eyes widened. He stepped back slightly, unsure what to say. Clara turned to him. "Greg, I'd assume you've been helping Nia get settled." He looked nervous now. Yes, well, there was a little mix-up." Nia said nothing. She didn't need to. The other 2 board members shook hands with her and greeted her with respect. It was clear they knew who she was and why she was important to the company. Greg stood silently, feeling the weight of the moment. He had made a wrong judgment, and now it was clear to everyone. The group began walking toward the elevator, heading up to the meeting room. As they entered, Clara looked at Nia and said, "We're excited to hear your ideas. Let's get started." Nia stepped in, calm and professional. She didn't need to raise her voice or demand attention. Her presence spoke for itself. And as the elevator doors closed, Greg was left standing in the lobby, realizing just how badly he had misjudged her. As the elevator rose to the top floor, Nia stood quietly with the board members. Clara smiled at her. "We're sorry for the delay downstairs," she said. "We didn't know you weren't brought up right away." "It's all right," Nia replied calmly. "I'm just glad we're moving forward now." The two other board members, Mr. Alvarez and Miss Kim, nodded in agreement. They had heard great things about Nia from past partners and were eager to hear her ideas. The elevator doors opened and the group stepped out onto the executive floor. It was bright and quiet, with large windows showing a clear view of the city. They walked into the main conference room, where everything was set up for the meeting. A projector, water bottles, and notepads were ready at each seat. Meanwhile, Greg rushed back upstairs, trying to stay behind the group without being noticed. His face was tight with worry. He had no idea Nia was invited by the board itself. Now he felt embarrassed for making her wait, and worse for assuming she wasn't important. Inside the room, Nia opened her folder and placed her materials on the table. Clara motioned for her to begin whenever she was ready. Nia stood up and connected her presentation to the projector. Her slides appeared on the screen, clear, simple, and full of useful data. She began to speak, her voice steady and professional. "Thank you for inviting me here today. I've taken time to study your recent growth and your current goals. I'd like to share a few ideas that could help you move to the next level." Everyone at the table leaned forward, listening closely. Nia spoke with confidence and clarity. She talked about market trends, customer feedback, and practical strategies that matched the company's goals. Her ideas were not only smart, they were easy to understand and realistic to apply. As she moved through her slides, the board members asked questions. Nia answered each one with clear points and strong examples. Even when the questions were tough, she stayed calm and thoughtful. Greg sat near the end of the table, quiet now. He watched as the board took notes, nodded in agreement, and praised her points. The same woman he had ignored earlier was now leading the room with skill and focus. About halfway through the presentation, Clara leaned toward Miss Kim and whispered, "She's exactly what we've been looking for." Miss Kim nodded. "We need her on the team." Nia finished her last slide and looked around the room. "Thank you for your time," she said. "I'm happy to answer any more questions." The room filled with quiet claps and smiles. Clara stood up. "Nia, this was impressive. We'll be discussing the next steps shortly." Greg lowered his eyes. He knew this moment would stay with him for a long time. After the presentation ended, the board members stayed in the room, talking quietly among themselves. Nia stepped out into the hallway to give them a few minutes of privacy. She stood near the large window, looking out at the city below. The sky was still clear, and the buildings cast long shadows in the afternoon sun. She felt a calm sense of peace, not because she had impressed anyone, but because she had stayed true to herself. She came prepared, stayed respectful, and did what she had promised. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Her work spoke for itself. Inside the meeting room, Clara closed her folder and looked at the others. "That was one of the best presentations we've had in a long time," she said. "Agreed," said Mr. Alvarez. "She understands what we need. Her plan is not only strong, it's practical." "I think she should be offered a consulting contract right away," added Miss Kim. "We shouldn't wait." Greg sat silently. He was no longer trying to speak up. Part of him hoped no one would bring up how he had treated Nia earlier, but the silence around him was heavy. Clara finally turned to him. "Greg," she said, "why was Nia kept waiting in the lobby for 2 hours?" Greg looked down. "I didn't realize she was the guest from the board's email. I thought she was just another walk-in." "You didn't check her name?" Clara asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, I didn't." There was a long pause. "Nia didn't say anything bad about you," Miss Kim said. "She just waited, patiently, respectfully. That says a lot about her character." Greg nodded, not looking up. And it also says something about yours, Clara added, her voice steady but serious. Outside, Nia continued to wait quietly. She wasn't upset. She knew things had become clear now. She didn't need to raise her voice to be heard. The truth had already spoken for her. A few moments later, Clara stepped out of the room and smiled. Nia, we'd like you to stay for a short meeting with our project team. We're ready to move forward with your proposal. Nia returned the smile. I'd be happy to. As they walked back into the room together, Greg stayed quiet. He gave a small nod toward Nia, almost as an apology. She gave a polite nod in return, but didn't stop walking. She had work to do, and she was ready for it. And while Greg stayed behind, thinking about what had just happened, Nia stepped forward into a new beginning, one that had been earned, not given. The meeting room was now filled with fresh energy. More team members had joined the table, and everyone listened as Nia began to explain how her ideas could be put into action. She spoke with calm focus, using simple words to explain complex steps. She showed charts and timelines, broke the project into clear phases, and explained how the company could grow without taking big risks. People asked questions, and Nia answered each one with care. She didn't try to impress anyone with fancy words. She just explained the truth, backed by research and experience. As she spoke, even some of the quieter staff members began nodding. They could see how her ideas would help not just the company, but the team itself. Someone from the finance department leaned forward. This plan works with our current budget, and she's thought about future costs too. Yes, added a senior developer. Her plan includes us from the start. We're not just getting handed a final product. We're part of the process. Clara looked pleased. Miss Kim took notes. Mr. Alvarez smiled slightly and tapped his pen on the table. Even Greg, though still quiet, had to admit to himself that the plan was solid. This wasn't someone hoping to be noticed. This was someone who had done her homework, knew the field, and had the right mindset. Somewhere during that meeting, the tone had changed. Nia was no longer just a guest. She was becoming part of the team. As the meeting wrapped up, Clara stood up. Nia, we'd like to offer you a formal partnership. This project is important to us, and we believe you're the right person to lead it. Nia smiled, steady and professional. Thank you. I look forward to working with all of you. Applause followed, not loud or forced, but warm and real. It came from people who respected her not just for her ideas, but for how she carried herself. After the meeting, people came up to introduce themselves. Some offered to show her around the office. One even asked if she'd like to join a team lunch later that week. Nia accepted each greeting with a calm nod and a kind smile. In the hallway, Greg watched from a distance. He didn't speak much, but in his mind, he knew he had learned a lesson that day. He realized that titles and quick judgments don't always show a person's value. Sometimes, the most capable people are the ones who wait quietly and still come out ahead. Downstairs, the receptionist saw Nia leaving the elevator with a small group of team members. Her face lit up with surprise and happiness. Nia walked past the front desk and gave her a grateful nod. Thank you for being kind, she said. The young woman smiled back. You earned it. A week later, the company's main office was buzzing with activity. Meetings were happening in every room, team members were moving between desks, and project plans were being reviewed and adjusted. In the middle of it all, Nia now had a quiet office near the planning department. It wasn't the biggest room, but it had everything she needed: space, light, and a clear view of the work ahead. She had been officially added as the lead consultant for the new project. Everyone now came to her for updates, ideas, and guidance. She didn't change her tone or style. She still spoke clearly and simply. She still listened before speaking. She worked hard but never made others feel small. Her focus stayed on the goal, not the title, not the praise, just the work. Word of her success spread through the building. People who had once walked past her without a glance were now greeting her in the hallway. Even those who didn't know the full story could see the results. The project was moving faster, the teams were working better together, and meetings felt more productive. One morning, Greg walked into her office with a file in hand. He looked a little nervous, but he spoke clearly. Nia, he said, I wanted to give you the updates from the tech team. And I also wanted to say I was wrong. about everything. Nia looked up and nodded. Thank you for the update, she said, taking the file. And thank you for saying that. He stood for a moment, then quietly turned to leave. He didn't expect forgiveness, but he knew he had to be honest. What he had learned was bigger than one meeting or one mistake. It was about respect, something he had taken for granted before. Nia turned back to her screen and kept working. She didn't need to hold a grudge. She had moved on. Her focus was on building something better, not just for the company, but for everyone working in it. Later that day, Clara stopped by her office. The board is very happy, she said. And we've noticed how the team responds to your leadership. Nia smiled. I'm just doing what I came here to do. Clara nodded. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who don't speak the loudest. As the sun began to set, casting a soft orange glow across the windows, Nia gathered her things. She took one last look at her notes for the day and stepped out of her office. In the hallway, people smiled and waved as she walked past, and somewhere in the background, Greg watched quietly, learning a little more each day. The company had changed in a small but important way, and it all began with a woman who waited, without complaint, and showed everyone what quiet strength really looks like.